Last February, Tammy and I purchased a new dishwasher. After 20 years, the one that was installed when our home was built finally gave out. When the new one was installed and we ran it for the first time, it scared us. It was so quiet. I joked that our old one had come with airplane mode, a function that made it as loud as a jumbo jet. As we enjoyed the newfound peace that this simple appliance could offer us, and our ability to run it whenever we wanted and whenever it suited us, without worried about hearing the TV or the children or being able to sleep, we didn't realize how lucky we actually are. Within a few weeks, the pandemic had set upon us. Stories began to pop up on the news that with the breakdown of the global supply chain, it was getting harder and harder to buy appliances like dishwashers, washer dryers, refrigerators, which we also had to replace last summer. The great home improvement craze of the COVID-19 pandemic had begun. Spending day after day in our homes last year, we began looking at the same walls, looking for ways to add new opportunities for activity, excitement, or to make our day-to-day lives better. Companies like Peloton took off in 2020, right, Steve? With more business than they could handle. You couldn't buy a dishwasher or a refrigerator without waiting months for delivery. The housing market took off as people who had the opportunity seized when they realized they wanted more from their home lives. And with the newfound flexibility that working from home offered, they took advantage. Spending time with our significant others also led to a distinct rise in that most basic, almost evolutionary instinct, something that many of you, and you know who you are, indulged in. You got a pandemic puppy. My hopes for you and your new bundle of joy is that it has not yet worn out its welcome. Thankfully for the Weisman household, we were able to keep our kids' desires at bay for now. It is natural to look around our lives, to look at our situation and wonder, how could I make this better? For all of those external forces in our lives, our home, our work, where we spend our time, making the choice to upgrade or improve can come fairly easily. We might redo a kitchen or a bathroom, seek out a new job, try a new activity, and inject some new spice or flavor into our lives. With enough room on the credit card or the home equity loan, we can accomplish almost anything. The one thing we can't do with that, though, is what we come to synagogue on Rosh HaShanah to do, which is to improve ourselves. For those of us like me who tend to struggle and find or maintain our patience, there is the space, a Target that has USB patience packs right next to the cell phone battery packs. We can't go to Lowe's and buy a new honesty extractor or to Best Buy and buy a new empathy energizer. The work of Teshuvah, the work of identifying the areas of our potential growth and challenging ourselves to become the people we mean to be, is work that we have to do on, for, and by ourselves. There are no shortcuts, no way to speed it up with new components or contraptions. That work begins with admitting to ourselves that we have what to do. At this high holy day season, our words of prayer relay that message. Hineni he'ani mima'as. Here I am, so poor in deeds, we said, as Rosh Hashanah began. Avinu Malkeinu chonenu va'anenu ki ein banu ma'asim. Avinu Malkeinu, answer us with grace, for our deeds are wanting, is our mantra for this season, our hook. Anachnu azefanim ukshei oref lomar lefanecha tzadikim anachnu v'lo chatanu, aval anachnu chatanu. We are arrogant and stubborn, claiming to be blameless and free of sin, but we have stumbled and strayed. We have done wrong, this confession we will make in 8 days on Yom Kippur. Throughout the high holy days, we offer these words of humility. We admit to the Holy One and to ourselves that we have much work to do in order to become the people we want to be. Social psychologist Dolly Chugg has spent her entire career studying that very undertaking, and by her own admission, it is hard. The personal bio in her book ends with, in her real life, she is trying just as hard as everyone else to be the person she means to be. Her work has highlighted incredibly important realities about the way our minds work, especially when it comes to personal growth. She started with the groundbreaking work of Stanford professor Carol Dweck, who distinguished between fixed and growth mindsets. In a fixed mindset, I see all of my abilities, all of my talents, all of my intelligences, or lack thereof, as inherent to who I am, essentially immutable and unchangeable. My potential is defined and constrained by those fixed traits. And any inabilities or shortcomings I might have are simply a part of who I am. However, in a growth mindset, a phrase that Dr. Dweck coined, I see myself as being able to change and improve. Skills or talents I don't have today, with effort and time and feedback from others, I can develop. If I wish to hone or sharpen or blunt a trait, that opportunity lays before me. I believe that our Jewish tradition is essentially of the growth mindset. And the work that we do each fall on the High Holy Days is Exhibit A. We are told that we can change, that we can tell ourselves that we can change. We spend the month of Elul examining ourselves and the 10 days of our committing to do that work. Our whole idea of Teshuvah is an expression of that growth mindset, that we can develop better versions of ourselves, learn to keep in check our evil inclinations, our Yetzer Hara, as we make our way through our years of life. Not that it is easy. And that's where Dr. Chugg is so insightful. She identifies why it's so hard. It's hard because challenging ourselves to improve means we have to admit to ourselves that there are parts of ourselves that are lacking, that there are parts of ourselves that we know are, well, bad. And we can't change it right away. It takes time. So what does that mean? It means we have to sit in that uncomfortable space of knowing that there are parts of us that are not good, that we are people who are less than good. And that conflicts with our sense of self that says, I'm a good person. Too often, Dr. Chugg explains that rather than sit in that discomfort, we panic and look for a way out. Our fight or flight response kicks in, and we fight the notion that we are less than good. Can't be me, we tell ourselves. And instead we blame others. Tell ourselves that their actions caused our reactions, that it's their fault, not ours. We make excuses for why the work of improvement that we need to do doesn't really need to be done. I know this because I do it myself. Spending the greater part of the last 18 months at home with my kids, my patience with them has at times run thin. Hi, girls. I love them, everything about them, except this one thing. I don't know if it's unique to them or not. If you've ever had an 8-year-old or a 5-year-old or a 3-year-old little girl living with you, maybe you can answer that for me. Because the thing that I struggle with them the most is that sometimes they just don't listen. This wonderful attribute they have, their selective oral engagement, manifests in several ways. They have the ability, if they so choose, to completely turn off their ear canals, and the words I say bounce off their skulls and dissipate into the ether. Sometimes the words actually do enter into one ear and then immediately exit the other. I know when that happens. I ask them to do something. They say, "Yes, Daddy," and then proceed to do anything but that. Sometimes they tease me into thinking it worked. They heard me ask them to go brush their teeth. They go over into the bathroom. They pick up their toothbrush. They look at themselves in the mirror. Then they get distracted, drop the toothbrush, and walk around and turn away. Now you know the reasons, you know the rationalizations, all the explanations I have as to why I lose my patience with my children. I ask that you please share them with Her Honor the Judge at my trial, giving testimony to my acknowledgement of the situation. If only my children would be better listeners, I wouldn't run out of patience. Of course I know better than that. Maybe not in the moment, but on this powerfully awe-filled day, this day Norav Ayom, this day when we look at the snapshots of who we are and examine them for flaws, we see them. I know I need to work on my patience, but too often when we realize that something about ourselves needs improvement, we fail to do it. Why? We're good people. We know right from wrong, but year after year, we come to Rosh HaShanah with a list of improvements we want to make. And if you're anything like me, your list from this year looks a lot like the list from last year, and the year before, and the year before. In her work, Dr. Chugg spent a lot of time focusing on a particular issue that has become a perennial concern: race and racial inequalities. She set out to explore why good, moral-minded folks struggle so much with understanding and internalizing what communities of color have been trying to get across to the larger population. Good people are empathetic to the plight of others, she reminded us. Good people don't engage in behavior that exacerbates inequality. And we're good people. But when we spend time really looking at the realities of racial inequality in this country, it's hard not to conclude that most of us, at times, are contributing, usually unwittingly and unaware, to exacerbating those inequalities. So what then do good people do about it? Well, the acclaimed author Jodi Picoult wondered the same thing. In her New York Times best-selling book, she often focused on moral issues of the day, like LGBTQ rights or assisted dying or even the legacy of the Holocaust. But when she tried to write a book about racial inequalities, she struggled. She struggled because she didn't really understand the forces at play, and learning them was challenging for her, as it is for most white Americans. It certainly has been for me. Over the past few years, led by members of our congregation, together we have read books and articles, listened to podcasts, visited historical sites, met with leaders from neighboring communities of color, all in an attempt to better understand the forces at play in our community that seek to reinforce inequalities of opportunity in generation after generation. It's not always easy, in part because the privileges that members of advantaged groups enjoy are not always visible to them. The psychologist, author, and former NBA basketball player John Amici pointed out something that was absolutely brilliant. White privilege, he said, in discussing racial bias in the workplace, and indeed all privilege, is actually more about the absence of inconvenience, the absence of an impediment or a challenge. As such, when you have it, you don't really notice it. But when it's absent, it affects everything you do. Amici puts his finger on something that is so important to understanding how privilege operates, that it manifests not as advantages experienced by the privileged party, but disadvantages experienced by the disprivileged. What that means is recognizing our privileges is incredibly difficult. And realizing that we are contributing to it is even harder. Then our fear takes over. Fear of being that person who isn't good. That's what held Jodi Picoult back until she realized something else about being a good person. Being a good person means that you're compelled to improve yourself, and you know that you can. Rather than letting her anxiety about wanting to be seen as a good person get in the way of her seeing the truth about herself, she utilized her commitment to being a good person to challenge herself to improve. Good people, she realized, are not flawless. Good people want to fix their flaws. That is the reality of what the High Holiday season is all about. Cheshbon nefesh, looking honestly at ourselves, is done so we can identify those flaws. Doing teshuvah is fixing them. You do not wish the death of sinners, but urge them to return from their ways and live, we read in Unatana Tokef. Addressing the racial inequality in our world is a task beyond any one of us individually, but we all have a role to play. As the famous teaching from Rabbi Tarfon reminds us, we are not obligated to finish the work, but we cannot ignore it either. So I ask myself, if only my children would be better listeners, I wouldn't run out of patience? Is the problem really that my daughters can at times be obstinate? No. That's just an excuse. The ultimate defense mechanism to shield myself from the difficulty of confronting the reality that I know to be true. And as much or as little as my children might listen to what I say to them, my children don't lose my patience. I do. I am responsible for that. That is my work of teshuvah in this new year, along with a lot more. In a few moments, we will hear the cries of the shofar meant to awaken us from our slumber, shake us out of the comfortable path we have set for ourselves. The calls go from the wholeness of tekiah to the broken shavarim, to the shattered teruah, and back to whole. So is the journey of teshuvah. We think we are whole only to have the reality broken when we are confronted with the truth of our opportunities for growth. It is scary, challenging, perhaps even painful to look so intently at who we are and resolve to push through the discomforts that real improvement takes. But just as the calls of the shofar resolve back to tekiah, so can we be made and make ourselves whole. And not just whole, but greater than before. Tekiah gedola, a better version of ourselves. Ken Yehi Ratzon. May this be God's will for us all. Shana Tova.